You know, niggas gotta get their priorities together. Got their mind on the wrong things, spending their money in the wrong way.
Trapaholic, real trap shit.
Say you need that car with the rims and a trunk, just like Jim. It's more than life. Yeah.
I'm telling you. Talk to him.
Say you need that LV bag with the belt and the hat.
That's all you got though.
It's more than life. Yeah.
Talk to him. Real.
Say you wanna turn up at the club, like some bottles, and press them guns. It's more than life.
Fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And who dat? And welcome back. After having a bit of a banger with the last UFC podcast, I admit I took a good while off, a couple weeks off, and kind of neglected the draft a little bit. But honestly, with the Saints, I haven't been a huge draft guy since probably 2017, and that's funny because that was like their last really great draft, you know. But I just remember that draft and being familiar with a lot of the players in that draft, whether it was the first or the seventh round, and basically uh, had it scouted, and for the best of needs, it was either Marshawn Lattimore with their first overall pick, or death. Basically, is how I felt with that draft. And I remember when they finally selected Marshawn Lattimore, I was jumping up and down. I was watching it with my friends. I was so happy. So that was probably my peak of draft following and knowledge, and just peak of interest, I guess. But I'm still interested in the draft, and I watched the first two rounds, and then of course the Saints didn't have another pick till the fifth round, and it just, you kind of lose interest, you know, when you go like an entire day without any picks. But I definitely followed like the first two picks, and definitely and even the first fifth round pick. But let's just get into that draft a little bit, because we got a lot to get into with the draft, and undrafted free agents, and even added some more players since I did my last podcast. They've even added some more players in free agency that are, you know, kind of interesting. No superstars or big names or anything. But anyways, let's get into the draft, because I really hadn't didn't do a podcast for the build up or anything. It was kind of straight on that the Saints needed an offensive lineman, offensive tackle, or death. Basically, that was like the only pick that they would make, you know, should intelligently make for the scenario, the offensive, the position that their offensive line is in right now. But let's get into the draft and go over some of these players and my thoughts. So, can I get a menu? And so the first pick, you know, the first pick, they traded up, which is almost just, it was almost kind of just annoying, because they went from what, 45 to 41. Oh, it's always weird when a team moves up just like one spot. I think the Vikings did that. They moved from like what, like the sixth or the fifth pick, or something like that. They just moved like one spot. I guess that's because they're hearing from the team ahead of them that someone else wants to trade in that spot and pick the same player as them. So I guess that's why a team would move up just one spot. But always kind of annoying when teams move up just like one spot. But they stayed pat. They stayed where in their position for the first pick that they made. And like I said, it was pretty much kind of like with the Marshawn Lattimore pick back in 2017, when their corners were so awful. You had like Sterling Moore and Damian Swan for your corners, like, so it was like corner or death. And that's kind of how this draft was. It was kind of offensive tackle or draft, and I feel as if they got a good one. That's what was great about it. They got Talisi Fuaga, out of Oregon State. He's been the starter there the last two seasons, 2022 and 2023, and he started and played in 25 games the last two seasons as well. And I think he's in those two seasons. It, definitely, I saw where it was said at least the last season, maybe all of last season, he only allowed like one sack, or it may have been both seasons. So he's good, and just kind of scouting him and scouting the offensive tackles. I mean, with some Joe Alt and some of the other ones picked ahead of him, you could still even argue that the Saints got the best offensive tackle in the draft. There's some people that show in like their big boards and their and where they have some of these players scouted for their teams had him as the best offensive tackle. Huaga, he's an oos. He's an oos. He's an oos like the bloodline. The Saints got a bloodline member in here, so with any recent history shown from them, is going to be successful and take control. And hopefully that's what the Saints need on the offensive line. Uh, I've heard some people mention like left tackle and stuff, but he played mostly right tackle. So that's another thing I hate when teams try to draft a player and then move them from the position that they played in the NFL. So with Ryan Ramchek's exploded knee, arthritic knee, I think it'll be no problem to have Fuaga move in right into that right tackle position. So I was happy with this pick. It's not like I was surprised by it or super pumped about it or anything, because it was just like that's what they got to do. They got to pick one of these good offensive tackles, one of these top 5 offensive tackles in the draft. So they made that pick, and then they we were talking about how they moved up uh, in the second round. They moved up just like 4 spots to take Kool-Aid McKinstry, who uh, when I heard the name uh, announced, I was really surprised, a little surprised that they took a corner. I guess there's talks about Marshawn Lattimore being traded and all that, and I guess that adds a little bit of the fuel to the fire. But it wasn't just that it was a corner; it was that it was Kool-Aid McKinstry, and I've done some scouting, not a lot, but seeing him on big boards and the rankings for corner. I mean, heck, just like Fuaga. I mean, he the Saints arguably see, it takes 2-3 years to decide, but man, with how this draft went, the Saints possibly got to the two of the best players at their position at at the at the offensive tackle and the corner. May have got the best offensive tackle and best corner in the draft. So I mean, hey, I mean you can't knock on this draft too much just from the first 2 picks. And something that's a little crazy and has me a little reserved is seeing some of these rankings, draft board rankings and stuff that actually are given like the Saints like between a B plus and like an A. Giving them a really high ranking. I don't know uh, if I should take that with a grain of salt, or if that's going to be bad luck that they are getting praised from people around the league or not. But I was excited, and it'll definitely make the 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 burn or the damage that you might feel if they end up having to trade Marshawn Lattimore. But I mean, he was a Kool-Aid McKinstry was like a shutdown corner in the SEC. Started all 3 seasons with with Alabama and put up good numbers. He started what? He uh, the started 22 games for them and put up good numbers across the board. Had 93 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, even 2 sacks, just 2 interceptions, but 23 pass deflections. His 2022 season, he balled out. He had 15 pass deflections that season. So seeing the Saints possibly draft the best corner in the draft with their first round pick was is something to celebrate. Probably celebrated that a little bit more than the Fuaga pick. But I guess there's reasons for Kool-Aid McKinstry to fall a little bit. I guess he didn't put up great numbers at the combine, even though he performed in the combine workouts, even though he's coming off of a broken foot or had a foot surgery that needed to be taken care of. But hey, I'm all for it. And so the Saints make those two picks, and I was pretty closely watching the first and the second round. And then I admit I really wasn't watching too closely of the second or the fourth round, but I imagined when I tuned back in or looked at the updates for it, I honestly assumed that they would have made another pick or would have made another trade, but they didn't. I got to pat them on the back and congratulate them a little bit for being able to stand pat, not be so addicted and wanting to trade. So it was great seeing them actually stay where they are and just try to add some youth to this team instead of just adding, because we've seen drafts where they make two picks like Fuaga and McKinstry, and that's it. That's the end of their draft. They have like two or three players picked. So they actually picked 7 players in this draft. So we waited to the 5th round, and when I finally did my updates and stuff, the player that they picked with their first 5th round pick, I guess that was the pick 150, I believe, was Spencer Rattler, actually a quarterback. So this is 2 years in a row where they've taken a quarterback in the mid rounds. They got Jake Haener last year, and then they got Spencer Rattler this year. And I followed a little bit of Spencer Rattler when he was in college. So I personally like this pick. I'm a fan of this pick just because of the potential and the publicity that kind of comes behind this kid, because they were, I guess it was the 2020 season when he put up decent numbers, won a decent amount of games. People were comparing him just because of his natural ability, and I think probably because of what he looks like too. We're comparing him to possibly going to be a first round pick or maybe the first pick in the draft, and comparing him to Patrick Mahomes. And I guess he was the top quarterback coming out of high school. He was a 5-star prospect. And so the numbers he put up, I guess this was his redshirt freshman year. He started 11 games. He completed 214 of 217 passes, which is 67.5 completion percentage, 331 yards with a 9.6 average, and 28 touchdowns. So that's pretty impressive with the seven interceptions, and then he had 172.6 rating, college QB rating. And so just after his redshirt freshman season, it was hey, on to the next thing. It's probably trying to get the Heisman, but that didn't happen. He ended up having a down year, and you kind of got to see a little bit of his character on display when he started having some bad performances, and there was his seat was starting to heat up with Caleb Williams behind him, and then he had a bad game and got pulled for Caleb Williams, and then Caleb Williams never looked back. And some of the shots of Spencer Rattler on the sidelines, just the disdain that you've seen from him, I could see why that could lead to him having like character issues coming into the draft. But he opted out, went into the transfer portal and went to South Carolina and put up, similar numbers, yards and completion percentage wise at South Carolina. Just not as many touchdowns. So he started 2022 and 2023. And I think they played they were actually made a bowl game in 2022, and he put up worse numbers. He only had 18 touchdowns and 12 interceptions that year. And then actually they didn't just weren't didn't just didn't display a lot of winning while he was at South Carolina, and didn't even make a bowl game in 2023. And he had one more touchdown, 19 touchdowns, and was able to cut down on his interceptions. But the passing numbers were similar both years. So just his numbers while he was at South Carolina, he was 539 for 798, which was a 67.5 quarterback rating. So that was exactly the same as 2 years as it was the one promising year he had in 2020. And then he had 6,212 yards passing with a 7.8 average, and then he had 37 total touchdowns and 20 interceptions. So just not numbers that never really improved off of the 2020 season. I think a lot of that was probably mental, and then obviously he went to a less talented team in South Carolina. But I like this pick. If he can get back to the publicity that was behind him, and he's talented as all can be, has a rocket for an arm, and has throws all the arm angles, and he's mobile, just like people were saying for Patrick Mahomes. I think with him, with Spencer Rattler, it's all about QB IQ and mental and decision making and accuracy more than anything. When it comes to athletic ability and arm talent, I think that's through the room. It's just have to do a little fine tuning of everything else. But I actually just the three picks really is all I've really gone through. But I like the Fuaga pick, I like the Kool-Aid pick, and I like the Spencer Rattler pick. I think that could easily be a sneaky pick. So I like this draft. I like this draft. Basically, just to be hands wiped clean how I feel about it. I like this draft. So there were some other players picked, obviously, in this draft, because we mentioned that there were six players drafted, but we'll just go over the position more than anything. So they got a wide receiver with Bud Means. They got a linebacker, Jalen Ford. They added a defensive tackle and Christian Boyd, and they added another offensive lineman, another tackle, and Josiah Isarim, and I didn't delve too deep into much players really outside like the top 100, top 150. So I can admit that I'm not overly familiar with the last four picks they made, but it's always interesting to find out. That's what rookie mini camp and training camp and the preseason is for. Only the two positions that I think that they kind of neglected in this draft was they didn't add another running back. I think I would have liked that and would have been interested in that. And they had a chance. They could have drafted in some of the later rounds. They could have traded up or picked players, some running backs later, like Blake Corum from Michigan or Will Shipley from Clemson. But I guess we'll be relying again on the group that we had last year that wasn't overly impressive, partially due to how bad the offensive line was, but just going off of explosiveness. Not last year, you saw like almost none of that from Jamal Williams, and I think it's pretty easy to say that even Alvin Kamara's lost a step. So your most explosive player last year, running back, who was hurt the majority of the years, Kendra Miller. So you're kind of relying on someone that was already coming off a knee injury and then dealt with multiple different types of injuries during his rookie year, but had a nice finale to his season. The last game of the season against the Falcons, he had a nice game where he had like 80 yards rushing and 20, 30 yards receiving, and just looked more like 10 times as explosive as Jamal Williams and maybe 5 times as explosive as Alvin Kamara. So they neglected running back in this draft, and then you know uh, it seems like it's pleased some people that they've added Chase Young, as if they still don't need an edge rusher, and that's where this draft was a little controversial for me, because there weren't any in with like, what was it, like the first 16 picks or so. There was yeah, for the first 15 picks, I think, because Minnesota, that's when they traded up in from 17 to 16 to take Dallas Turner. So the Saints had the chance to pick the best best edge rusher in this draft. So I wonder how hard. I'd love to know how hard they thought about that when picking with their first round pick. Like all offseason, that's all they've pretty much been talking about, is needing a pass rusher, an edge rusher, an offensive tackle, the player to block that player. And so they add Chase Young, and obviously right after that comes out has the neck injury, so that doesn't really make me feel overly confident about that signing or their position or their depth. So that was something that was questioned for me. I questioned a little bit, like, well, maybe they won't take a tackle here, because the best defensive player, maybe arguably at least the first defensive player in the draft, finally taken at 15 or at 16. But those are the only positions that be fun kind of to track uh, how some of those defensive players that the Saints could have picked with their first position end up panning out, But I think they made the right decision, though. Talisi Fuanga, and and because there was such a drought on defensive players being picked, that's kind of what led to Kool-Aid McKinstry dropping like he did. So if I was to give this draft a grade or anything like that, I don't think I would be giving it an A or anything, because like after your first two picks, it's kind of just like kind of meh. There's a lot of players with potential, but it's kind of hard to give this draft an A, an A minus, an A when they didn't have a third or fourth round pick. But besides that, I'd give it probably somewhere between a B plus. So I like this draft. All right, so we've gone into the draft a little bit. This is something I want to uh, pull it up here. Numbers have already been assigned to the rookie draft class. That seems like a really a record pace for that to happen. So this must have these numbers obviously were assigned by the team, just because of how quickly they were chosen and picked for every single one of the players, and the players haven't even signed their rookie contracts. I imagine they'll delve more deep into what number they want to wear when they're trying to agree on their rookie contract. But we'll go over these numbers real quick for the rookie class, and we'll sound off some of the other players that were picked after Spencer Radler. So tackle, your first round pick, Talisi Fuaga, is 75. So that's the old that's Andres Pete's old number. So I'm still a fan, would be a fan of them re-signing Andres Pete. So, but I guess it's not the end of the world. He has to wear a different number. But for some reason, I feel as if that won't be Fuaga's number, because I'm still kind of holding out hope for Andres Pete to be re-signed. I just think that would add some good depth. And then with their second round pick, Kool-Aid McKinstry. They assigned him 34, which that's not really a number that you see all that often corners wear anymore now that they're allowed to wear like single digits and digits like old quarterback numbers now. The smaller numbers like in the teens and in the single digits, you don't really see players wearing 34 like back in the day like Mike McKenzie, and that's the main player I identify with 34. So I would be willing to bet he changes his number to something more sleek, I guess you could say. And then you got quarterback Spencer Rattler with 18, which I find that hard to believe that that's be his number with Archie Manning and Peyton Manning wearing 18. I guess not Archie, but that just seems like a number that's almost kind of off limits a little bit for some reason. I think some receivers have worn that in recent history, but I just I don't see Spencer Rattler wearing that number. And then you got these are the players that were kind of picked in the the sixth, and I think the fifth and the seventh round. So wide receiver Bud Means 16, linebacker Jalen Ford 53, which I could actually see him wanting to wear that because of the dome patrol and all that. But that's kind of a reason why maybe that number should be a little bit off limits to some extent. Then you got defensive tackle Christian Boyd 97, and then you got tackle Josiah Isram Ezran 72. But nothing too exciting with any of those numbers. Excuse me. About the only ones that I could see sticking are probably the ones after the Rattler pick. Jalen Ford 53, Christian Boyd 97, Izareem I could see wearing 72, but all those other numbers I could see changing. But realistically, does it matter all that much? I haven't bought a jersey in at least 10 years, so it's not probably longer than that. So when it comes down to it, what numbers they wear probably really don't matter. All right, so now on to this is something that the Saints are known for or do every year. They add a bunch of undrafted free agents and try to fill some needs. They even give out like some big contracts to some of these players. So let's see, we'll go over this long list here, not delve too deep into it, but so running back. One of the first ones is Jacoby Cabody out of Louisiana, and then wide receiver Jermaine Jackson out of Idaho, which I think they gave him one of the biggest guaranteed monies, like 160 million or something like that. Then wide receiver Kyle Sheets out of Slippery Rock, wide receiver Mason Timpson, Yale, tight end Dalen Hooker out of Colorado State, which I think they topped the guaranteed amount that they gave Jermaine Jackson. I think his was like 160 million, and then I think he got like 164. Not, I'm saying 160 more or million, 160,000, 160 like 160,000 Jermaine Jackson and 164,000 for Dylan Hooker, which took his to like the most that a undrafted free agent rookie has got this season, got this year, this off season. And then O-line, Kyle Hergel out of Boston College, another offensive line, Chad Bursford, Boise State. I think he's just invited to the mini camp. O-line, Nurse Dean Newley out of Nebraska, more O-line. Center, Sincere Hainsworth, Tulane. Edge Nathan Latu, Oklahoma State. Defensive tackle Kyler Bog, Minnesota. Defensive tackle Malik Langham, Purdue minicamp invite. Linebacker Aaron Brull, Michigan State, another invite. Linebacker Isaiah Majors, Florida A&M, invited to minicamp. Isaiah Stelberg, linebacker South Dakota. Cornerback Rico Payton, Pitt State. Defensive back Lawrence Johnson, Southeastern Missouri State. Safety Millard Bradford, TCU. Safety Sean Princeton, Mississippi State. Invite the minicamp. And punter Matt Hayball, Vanderbilt. So they got a long list of undrafted rookie free agents that they've added as well. So they're trying to infuse a lot of talent, not talent and youth into this older team, one of the older teams in the NFL from last year. So I'm all for it. They at least added a running back there and added a lot more offensive line help and just pretty much every position there besides quarterback. But their numbers haven't all been assigned yet. It's hard to believe they even have numbers for all these players. Obviously, it's obvious majority of these players probably won't even make the team. But there's always some gems or diamonds in the rough. They obviously think high or thought high of tight end Dalen Hooker in Colorado State, and I've seen some media people that actually are already too early to predict or trying to say that he's gonna make the team or something. I think his best season was last year. He had like 700 yards receiving or something. Nothing before that. Previous to that would like blow you away or anything. But I guess we'll have to just wait and see. And so that's the draft, and that's the undrafted free agents and all the rookies. I think with how a lot of people felt about the Saints in the offseason and in free agency, I think it's taken quite a positive turn and outlook. The atmosphere of it seems more positive since the draft now, obviously because of a lot of sports media and outlets actually ranking the Saints highly. When it was just free agency, they were kind of banging on the Saints for not doing anything, not signing any big marquee free agents. So because it looks like they're trying to take a step back, from all or nothing, Super Bowl or bust. They're taking a bit of a step back with only adding like one or two players to their team in the draft and signing some bigger name free agencies or just giving a lot of money to their own guys, letting some of them walk. But they've even with free agency not being kind of slow since the prior to the draft and since the draft they've added some players, some that are kind of a little interesting, a little bit of interest to me, and I'll go over them real quick. Got the list here. So we got wide receiver Equanimous St. Brown coming over from the Chicago Bears. He's the bum ass brother of what is it? I just had it. St. Brown. I just had it. I had his brother's name in my head. He's plays for the Lions. Amaran St. Brown is the good brother. He's like the Pro Bowl wide receiver of that family. So nothing to get too excited about. Equanimous St. Brown. You can have a name, I guess, a nepotism name on your team, which is it's all right. he's still in the NFL because his brother's so good, would be what I would say. And then this was before the draft. They signed Kalika Hudson, linebacker from coming over from Washington, and he had actually some good numbers. That signing kind of for me, I kind of look as similar to the Willie Gay signing in the beginning of free agency, just because of the numbers and the amount of games that he started. So he's played 58 games for 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 Washington with 12 starts, and he had 8 of those starts last year, and he had his best numbers last year as well. So that's why it's a little surprising that Washington let him walk, because he wasn't just uh, a depth piece linebacker and a spot starter, started half the season, but he's also good on special teams, which the Saints are always trying to keep their special teams at a high, playing at a high level. But so last year he played in 17 games, all 17 games, 8 starts with 1 sack, 74 total tackles, 44 total, 30 assists, 5 tackles for loss, two quarterback hits, and with so that's those are impressive numbers to me. Like those are just as good uh, as Pete Warner, who had a bad year, kind of a bad year, down year last year, and Willie Gay had pretty similar numbers, or good numbers. So I feel better about the the linebacker depth now, because with these two signings of Kalika Hudson and Willie Gay, that was one of the positions that I was feeling uh, the start of free agency, start of off season, a little concerned about, just because of Demario Davis's age, and then Pete Warner having a bad season, and then there was just really no one else on the team. But I feel a lot better with that, and they also uh, added the rookie from Texas as well. What is it, Jalen Ford? I think that was his name. Yeah, that's Jalen Ford. So they had some nice depth at the linebacker position. So those are those players, and then they since the draft, they've also added some more offensive line help. They added Shane Lumino and Huron here. Justin Huron, offensive lineman. He came over from the Raiders, so he's familiar. I'm sure he's familiar with some of the coaching, a lot of this coaching staff here, and Derek Carr. So added more offensive line help. And those guys have played in a lot of games and have spot started and been depth places, other places. So, just adding more and more offensive line help, with the amount of guys that they've added in free agency, and the amount of that they've added in the draft, and in undrafted free agency. Hopefully they'll find something that'll fit and be cohesive with just the guys that they've added. And they had players like Max Garcia and Trey Turner, or some players that got hurt, like in training camp, and then and then and in the preseason. So even those guys, you have to remember, even those guys will be back and have a shot that they didn't really get a chance at. And then last free agent, and this is a kind of a bit of a notable one here, is Will Harris, a DB coming over from the Lions. So he's familiar with uh, with Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn. So there's a lot of similarities there that kind of translate to the Saints and Dennis Allen, at least as a defensive coordinator, if nothing else. But Will Harris, that's a signing that's good for the Saints. He probably come in, be right there with, you got Tyrann Mathieu, and then you got Jordan Howden who pretty much replaced uh, Marcus May, but Will Harris, he could easily come in and replace the production that the production or the lack thereof of production that Marcus May gave the Saints in the 2 seasons he's here. But he's played a bunch of games too, and started games as well as a spot starter, a depth piece for Detroit with the 5 seasons that he's been there. He was a third round pick in 2019, but he's played 81 games with 40 starts. So he started half the games that he's been in since he's been there. He had kind of down numbers compared to 2021, 2022 because he wasn't a starter really. He was just like a like the fourth, fifth defensive back on the team, and was more just special teams than anything. But he had some seasons where he put up in at least impressive numbers just in regards to being healthy and available and being able to tackle, I guess, if nothing else, for uh, a safety or a, a, a safety or a cornerback. But in 2021, he started 17, he started 17 of 17 games. Didn't have any interceptions, so this is going off of statistic. He's not really a ball hawk, but he had 4 pass deflections, forced fumble, half a sack, 93 tackles, 62 solo, 31 assist, and then just 1 quarterback hit. And then in 2022, he started 10 of 15 games, had 1 interception, 4 pass deflections, a forced fumble, fumble recovery. So he's a little bit more of a ball hawk in 2022. Had 57 tackles with 44 solo, 13 assists, and 2 tackles for loss, and 1 quarterback hit. And then he took a big step back just in his starts in last year, 2023, when he only started 2 of 17 games that he played in, only had 2 pass deflections, had a fumble recovery, but only had 18 tackles with 12 solo and 6 assists, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 quarterback hit. So I can see I can see why Will Harris would want to leave the Detroit Lions, because he kind of had to take a back seat to better players and players that were just starting over him last year. But he shows that he can do it. He can play any of those positions: free safety, safety, right cornerback, left cornerback, slot. I think he played the majority of his snaps on defense in the slot last year. So that could be helpful if the Saints if the Saints do end up trading Marshawn Lattimore, and then they move Alontae Taylor outside, and then you have Paulson and Devo on the outside, and then you have like a mixture of like Kool-Aid and Will Harris fighting it out for backup roles and nickel and dime positions. So that's a sneaky pick. I kind of look at him similar to the Hudson and the Willie Gay pick. You know, they're kind of mid-level signings, but you could be surprised what some of these mid-level signings that the Saints add. You know, they just had one. That's kind of how the Saints do it every year. They have like one like big marquee signing, and then they add these guys that are kind of average, you know, but above average, but have even more potential. You know, they have a higher ceiling. Like you know, these players have been in the league for a while, so you kind of know where their floor is, but they still have a bit of a ceiling that they can reach. And he's only, what is he? He's only 28 years old, so he's still young. Same with Willie Gay and Khalid Hudson. Those guys are only like 26, 27 years old, so they're still young. So I like what the Saints have done in the offseason so far, you know, and it's not over yet. We still have rookie mini camp, training camp, preseason, and then before that you have roster cut downs, cutting down to 53-man roster. So you know there might be some players that the Saints may want to take a look at when that time comes. But you know, for people out there, happy 2024 draft. I think it went pretty well with the ammunition that the Saints had. And shout out to some of the people that made the last podcast, last UFC podcast. Not a bit of a banger, More views than I usually get. I appreciate the 500 views, 500 plus views. I'm shouting out to anyone listening out there. Share, like. I, the more views, the more enjoyment for me, and that's something that just keep me going. But I like it. But anyways, I think that's about all I have for you this evening. And be nice to see kind of what the Saints do in the coming weeks with roster cuts and things like that. And uh, have to. I'm sure there'll be some roster predictions out there. But anyways, I think that's all I have for you. So who dat? And can I get a check, please?